Colorado fails to pass an assault weapons ban, plus former NRA board member Frank Tait on his efforts to reform the organization. That and more on this episode of the Weekly Reload Podcast.
No, the devil's got no hold on me.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of the Weekly Reload Podcast. I'm your host, Stephen Gutowski. I'm also the founder of thereload.com, where you can head over and sign up for our free weekly newsletter today if you want to get the latest in guns in American news, if you want to keep up with what's going on. You can also, of course, buy a membership to support our reporting, because that is how we make a living here at The Reload. That is how we are able to do what we do. And so the members make it possible. If you want to help make it possible, you should become a member. This week, we are discussing the NRA annual meeting, which I got back from just a few days ago. And there's, I think, a significant amount to talk about. So to that end, we have Frank Tait, who is a now former NRA board member, on the show to talk about his time at the organization and his thoughts on the annual meeting this year. So welcome to the show, Frank. Thanks for joining us.
Steve, thanks for having me. And by the way, I am a member of the Reload.
Wonderful.
I'm an annual member.
Well, I guess this doubles as a member segment, a very, very long member segment too, then, as well. But so I promise not to go any easier on you just because you're a member. But yes, so tell people a little bit more about yourself. What do you do for outside of your NRA activism, and what made you decide to get involved and run for the board?
I'm a 40-year education technology person. I retired from that in 2019. So I was actually out at the Indianapolis meeting in 2019. I am an NRA instructor. I'm a training counselor, chief rate and safety officer. I've been doing that since 2006. So, competitor, IDPA, USPSA, 3-gun, trap, loved it. And as a training counselor, I love creating new instructors. So that's my passion in firearms. What got me started with the reform movement in the NRA is Adam Kraut. Adam was the manager of a gun store where I'd made many purchases. Adam actually built my first AR pistol for me. And so at the 2019 annual meeting, was chatting with Adam before the members meeting, and he had prepared the resolution calling for the vote of no confidence in the executive vice president, finance, audit, and executive committees for all the malfeasance that had been coming out in the press. And he asked me if I'd be willing to put my name on it, and I said yes. So I was the one who stood up and made that resolution in 2019. Was infuriated by the parliamentary maneuvering to try and keep that from being dealt with. And then when Adam decided that his work as a lawyer protecting our rights was more important than serving on the NRA board, I decided to pick up his mantle and carry that forward, and ran for the board for 2020, 2021, 2022. Kept trying to keep focus on issues. One of the things the reason that I'm going after it as a board level is I have been a board member of various organizations for over 25 years. So I have been an operator serving as senior management on public companies of, from $500 to $700 million of revenue. So I understand what it takes to run a big business. And I have been a board member on nonprofit organizations, and I understand nonprofits and how they work. And most of my career has been serving the education and government industries, where I understand the accounting rules for nonprofits because they're very similar to government accounting.
Okay, and so you're obviously a dissident board member. You got on. It took a little bit of effort there, but you did eventually make it onto the board. You've served a shortened term because you made it on after another board member passed away, because you were sort of the runner-up, I guess, in last year's election, And that is how you got onto the board, right?
Yeah, I ran in 5 elections, 3 to get on the ballot, 3 to be elected as a director, and twice for the 76th director. And my record is a stellar 0 for. I was 0 for 5. And then it's only when Dave Butts passed away that I was the only remaining candidate on the ballot who had not been elected. And per the bylaws, that immediately elevated me to the board. So that's how I got on. Not the way I would have wanted it, but I got on.
Certainly. And your term just ended at this year's annual meeting, right?
Yeah, I was on for about 6 months.
Okay. And going back to that resolution real quick from 2019, if I'm remembering correctly, and please do correct me if I get this wrong, that ended up being referred to the board for further action, right? It wasn't outright defeated.
To the Bylaws and Resolutions Committee.
Right. And so they were supposed to determine, so basically the board was going to determine whether or not the board should resign. These large number of members of the board should resign. Is that
the Bylaws and Resolution Committee, circular file. They never dealt. I don't have the minutes from that meeting when it was actually, I do have the minutes for that. I should go back and look. But I know that no further action was ever taken on it.
Right. But it's this by parliamentary maneuvering, instead of voting up or down in that 2019 meeting, they had a third option where you could vote to refer this motion to the board. But essentially that meant that the board would decide whether or not the board was corrupt and should resign.
Exactly.
Right? So I remember finding that very symbolic in a way, but
infuriating is another word to describe it.
Sure. So, we just got done with the annual meeting here once again in Indianapolis, which, of course, invites a lot of comparisons, I think. This year it's interesting because this year was significantly better attended than last year. And I think that is obviously a positive sign for the NRA as an organization. I think it was 66,000 in 2022, and this year it was somewhere around 77,000 was the attendance that they gave, and you could tell the difference in the building. It certainly felt like there were far more people in the exhibit hall, at the leadership forum, at the members meeting. It was definitely more of a resurgence for the NRA in terms of at least the annual meeting. And so, is that your feeling of the event as well?
Yeah, I thought last year's members meeting was maybe 500 people. And it was, I'll call it low energy. This year, I think was similar energy, but maybe more like 700 people. There were still some members trying to push resolutions similar to in 2019, and I think their parliamentary knife is very, very sharp in terms of how they cut them off. Also, they did have the up and down votes on the resolutions this year, and they were soundly defeated. And I think that's is disappointing because I think a number of I'll call them the dissident group has given up and gone to support other organizations. They don't turn up anymore.
Yes, I would say that maybe a third of the people present at the members meeting voted there were 2 resolutions. One is effectively calling on President Charles Cotton to resign, and the other one calling on Wayne to resign, and both of those were defeated. And I think about a third of the audience voted in favor of them, which actually, to be honest, was more than I was expecting after the way that the members meeting began, which was with a standing ovation for Wayne LaPierre. So, it was interesting to see that standing ovation, and then also to see people still basically saying he should resign. And you did still see a very similar breakdown to the 2019 meeting in the sense that most people who spoke for the resolution were regular NRA members, and most people who spoke against it were NRA board members. A lot of the same people actually that had spoken in 2019. So, that's an interesting dichotomy. Certainly the board has this entire time been very supportive of Wayne LaPierre and his leadership. And those who aren't or weren't are all completely gone now, including yourself, right? Phil Journey is also off the board now, wasn't renominated in part because the board controls who gets renominated, right? To a large extent.
And then Grant Hill as well.
Yeah. And you also saw over the last 4 years, essentially any of the board members who spoke out publicly criticizing Wayne's use of private jets or luxury vacations and so forth were effectively removed from their committee assignments first and then not renominated and off the board.
One minor adjustment to that, spoke out privately or publicly. So even if they tried to keep it just inside the board, that any perspective of disloyalty, you became what Marion Hammer called the enemy within and needed to be removed.
So I think was it Jay Prince, who's a NRA board member. Yeah. He said a number of colorful things, as he does basically every year during the members' meeting whenever these topics come up. But I think it was Prince, or it might have been Tom King, who accused the person who sponsored the resolution this year of basically being the same as Michael Bloomberg, which is a common refrain that you hear, and presumably that applies to you as well. How do you feel, about that criticism? That essentially the main critique that you'll hear from board members who support Wayne is that those like you who are critical of him or want to remove him are hurting the NRA, that you're doing the work of Michael Bloomberg or gun control advocates, that you're weakening the organization by doing this. How do you feel? How do you respond to those sorts of accusations?
Iron sharpens iron. So the only way a board is able to strengthen an organization is to have rigorous debate and to hash through issues and deal with them forthrightly. Suppression of comments, suppression of dissent, to me is a sign of weakness. Because if you can't defend the position, you have to ostracize and eliminate those that have contrary views. To me, it's a sign of weakness. So, most of my career is mergers and acquisitions. It's evaluating companies, evaluating leadership teams, and looking for strength. When I'm evaluating a company, if the leadership team defers all the decisions to one person, we don't buy that company because that's not a leadership team that can scale. That's just a leader who is doing things the leader wants done. That's not a scalable, growing organization. And I think the track record of the NRA for the past 4 years mirrors that, because you have suppressed dissent. You have basically what's the right word for it? Institutionalized weakness in terms of a smaller and smaller group of people are supporting positions, and only people that support those positions are brought onto the board in terms of the nominating process. And those that try to come on as I don't refer to myself as a dissident. I refer to myself as an independent director. I bring an independent perspective. I've been a life member since '91. I've been a member since '79. I support the mission of the NRA and the association. But that just because I support the mission doesn't mean I need to support management. And I think that's what a true independent director does on a board, is that, do we have the right leaders in place? Do we have the right succession plan in place? Is our budget achievable? Do we have the right plans and programs in place? And if you don't say yes, then you are you're the enemy within.
Well, let's go through a couple more of these critiques while we're on this topic, or these responses, because a number of them came up again at the members' meeting, right? These common defenses that you'll hear of Wayne and members of leadership. One being essentially that Wayne LaPierre has done a lot for the NRA and to protect the Second Amendment, and his name being on the fundraising letters brings in so much money for the NRA that he effectively deserves the salary that he gets paid in terms of because he makes more than $2 million a year, right? And that's been a point of criticism before, but I think there was one board member said that as a percentage of the group's revenue, he's making less than other gun rights groups leaders, I guess because the NRA's revenue is so large, obviously, compared to other groups. And additionally, some of these things that he does, like using private jets commonly, or a number of other expenses that get run through the NRA, mosquito treatments for his house, different car rentals, that sort of thing, are necessary because of the unique safety concerns that he has, because he's been swatted a number of times. He's been, there's obviously, he gets death threats constantly. These are often the justifications that you will hear for some of the spending that has gone on in regards to Wayne LaPierre, and in regards to how much he makes from the organization. What is your response to that? Like, do you think those are legitimate, or what? Why wouldn't those be legitimate defenses of what he's done?
Couple thoughts here. One is, agree, Wayne has done great things for the organization in the past. The job of the board is not to honor the past. The job of the board is the guidance for the future. And I think that's one of the challenges with the board. They are looking in the rear view. They're looking in the rear view mirror, not in the windshield. And that when my term on the board I did not get into any of the compensation points. To me, the record in the New York AG case in the bankruptcy lays out pretty well what the expenditures are. And the New York AG has taken exception to them. And I'm not a judge, but when you look at them, I think many of those expenditures were inappropriate. I'll just stop at that. That's for the jury. That's for the jury to decide. But when you look at what the death threats and other pieces and security, they're expenses. But when I look at the budget of the NRA, I look at there's a concept in management, boulders, rocks, and pebbles. And the expenditures are pebbles in terms of overall expenditures in the business. The boulders that need to be dealt with are the declining membership and the excessive, and I will use the word excessive, legal fees. So when you look at those two things, everything else is, when you're in a $200 million budget, what are the big numbers? You've got membership, which is more than half of that, which is, it's $100 million plus of membership, from the 990 reports. And then you have legal fees that are over $50 million. Well, that's, they're the two big boulders. And so what are you doing to manage the boulders? The little stuff works itself out. And I think that's been one of the challenges with the reform movement, is being overly focused on little things that, as a board member, we talk about, well, what's material? And the other way of looking at things is, what's a rounding error? So if it's a rounding error, is it really relevant to spend board time on? And I will say I've seen board members spending time in meetings on rounding error items because they weren't dealing with the boulders. And the boulders are the membership revenue, the declining membership revenue, and the increasing legal fees.
Right. But a lot of reform-minded people, a lot of people who want to get rid of Wayne LaPierre, see those things as connected, right? Do you view them that way? Like, the legal fees are what they are.
Yeah.
because of this New York lawsuit over the allegations of corruption and misappropriation of funds, right? And the declining membership, at least from a dissident point of view or a reformer point of view, is connected to those things as well, right? Do you hold that view, or do you see it differently?
They are connected, but again, that's when I come back to what's in the rearview mirror versus what's in the windshield. So the rearview mirror, all those things happen. Should those expenditures have happened? No. Should there be restitution for that? Well, that's a matter for the court. Personally, I think there should be restitution for those inappropriate expenditures.
Do you think that things have been fixed on that front? Do you think the inappropriate expenditures have actually stopped? Last year, the NRA spent $1.2 million on private flights again. During your time on the board, did you get the sense that things have been reformed? Because this is obviously one of the key points of contention in that New York case. The NRA's basic defense is that, yes, there were issues previously. This is something that they went on at length in the failed bankruptcy filing, but that they instituted a number of reforms and that they fired some people like Josh Powell and Woody, the former treasurer, Woody Phillips and Chris Cox, and so they try to point to this as points of reform, and they claim that the problems have been solved. Do you feel that's the case, or do you think there are ongoing issues on that front?
I will give the NRA credit. They have they have reformed some areas, not all. I sat through 2 audit committee meetings. I'm trying to think of how I can phrase this and maintain. I read the audit engagement letter. I read the auditor's management letter. I read the auditor's reports. The auditors are doing a thorough job as they should. I spent time, I serve on boards, and one of my fellow board members is a recently retired Big Four partner in auditing firms. And so he schooled me in terms of how to approach the audit committee meetings. And I will say that the auditors are doing what they need to be doing. So I feel that part is correct.
But I guess the bottom line is that is good to hear. I imagine that will be reassuring to some NRA members who are still with the group, which does still have 4.2 million or so members. But I guess the bottom line is, in your view, it does sound like perhaps you think the organization could go on if it made some reforms to how it operates under the same leadership, and things will be able to be corrected. Is that true?
It's better. It's not right yet.
Okay.
So one of the things that all the other boards that I'm on have a clear, consistent, either what you call it a delegation of authority or a grant of authority document that spells out who can make what decisions when. What does the board have to approve by bylaws? What can the board approve by dollar amounts? Things like contract approvals, signatures. Where does the board need to be informed of things? Down to individual manager levels for expenditures. The documentation for that is scattered through multiple documents, and it's incomplete. To me, it is incomplete, and so the auditors can only audit to what documentation they have. So I had recommended multiple times that the NRA needed to adopt a structure like that, where it was clear that employees knew what the rules were, management knows what the rules are, board members know what the rules are. And I think that's one of the gaps, is that because these rules are scattered through all these documents, that board members don't know what's appropriate. They only know what they're told. And I think that's that's a major issue that needs to be cleaned up. There's going to be a chief compliance officer brought to the members for approval in the 2024 election, where the NRA needs a new officer who is the chief compliance officer, who is responsible to make sure everything is being done correctly.
Because it's interesting, one thing that I think is a big question is whether or not the NRA can be reformed under current leadership. Or, obviously that their argument in court is that it has been reformed and is operating better and doesn't have the same issues. But Wayne LaPierre is at the center of most of these allegations of misuse of funds, and he's only gotten more powerful inside the NRA since then. As far as I could tell, he took the agency into the entire group into bankruptcy effectively on his own. He had to go to the board after the fact to get emergency approval. Board members didn't find out until it broke in the news that happened. And then even just recently, they gave Wayne LaPierre the power to sell off the gun collection that they have at will without board approval.
So that's one where I dug deep into that one. So just to be clear, the NRA by law has to honor any donor restrictions. So items that were donated as you can't sell it, it has to be in the museum, that has to be honored. Items that were donated without restriction, the NRA has the ability to sell. And that items that were donated prior to 2001 are considered unrestricted. The bylaw change that was done streamlined the process because it used to be that the collection committee had to approve a sale. Then it had to go to the finance committee to approve a sale to then be able to be executed by management. And so the bylaw change streamlined that process. But the only firearms that are able to be sold are those that were donated with a open, you can sell it. If you display it, sell it, do whatever you want with it, it's now an asset for the NRA to benefit the NRA. What I've seen most people do is actually donate it to the foundation, and the NRA cannot sell foundation assets for the benefit of the NRA. The assets to the foundation.
Although isn't there a lawsuit over that as well?
There is that's the DC lawsuit, which is the Attorney General in DC is claiming that the NRA was, I'll just use, these are my words, may not be legally accurate, misappropriating funds from the foundation for the benefit of core NRA.
Mm-hmm. Right. So that's another active lawsuit against them. Yes. But right. That is interesting information. So just so everyone's clear, because this was something that people talked a lot about when it first came out. Who has the power to obviously look, it's a private collection. So the NRA could always sell off and has always sold off some guns that are donated to it, if they're not particularly, worthy of being in the museum or something like that. They have the ability to sell them off and raise funds to complete their mission. I don't think that's particularly controversial. But the thing that was controversial is that it went from being something that had to be board approved to something that Wayne could do, or not him personally, but his office, the executive vice president, could do without getting approval from the board. Is that what happened?
Yeah, that is only for those assets that do not have donor restrictions.
Okay, so he can't sell ones that someone says, "Correct. All right, I'm giving this to you with the stipulation that you have to display it in the museum." So some of the more famous guns that the NRA has,
I'll give you an example.
Can't be sold.
I looked specifically at the bequest of the Peterson collection, which is one of the more famous collections, and that bequest is very, very clear that those firearms are to be displayed as part of the museum and may never be sold or transferred. And so that was part of the. Now I think I'm okay here. That was actually part of the audit to validate that the NRA was in compliance with the restrictions, they are in compliance with the restrictions on donated firearms. That was a specific item addressed in the audit.
Okay. Well, that's good to have the full details on that. I mean, this is kind of an aside. I still think it shows the basic point that Wayne has still gotten more power, not less power, as time has gone along.
Yes.
Since 2019. Now but your main point here is that you're less concerned about, a yacht trip that Wayne took in 2016 or something, and then you are about the loss of 1 million members of the last 4 years, or the ballooning legal costs to the point where it's now the top line item, top single line item in the NRA's budget is legal fees for
other
the
than
administration.
other than
stuff.
fundraising costs, yes.
Right.
Yeah. So, and that,
at least according to their own, the annual meeting, the annual reports that they put out.
And so I'll say part of it is because of the lawsuits, the courts are going to deal with the past expenditures. And as the board is unwilling to make any changes in leadership. And that the only way that you can make a change in leadership, it takes if I remember correctly, it's a 3/4 vote of the board.
Right.
And so when the board nominating process for 20 years has been to bring people on board who are supportive of the current management team, to get 3/4 of that board to make a change in leadership, when all the things came out in 2019, it's pretty clear that they are unwilling or unable to make a change in leadership. And so they're just going to stay the course, and that anybody who does not enthusiastically stay the course gets removed. So
right.
That's not going to get fixed through the current election process or the board process. To me, the only thing that's going to fix that is the court.
So you've it sounds like you've kind of given up hope on making internal changes, and now you're relying on, I guess, the judge in the New York case, because obviously the attorney general, certainly the NRA would say, and I think a lot of gun rights advocates would agree, that she is not in it to save the NRA by any means, right? She would just as soon see it dissolved and send its money to other groups than have it reformed. But perhaps so I guess the reliance here is on the judge making a good decision. Is that where you're laying your hope now?
I think there's two thoughts here. One is when you're in a battle and your enemy is defeating themselves, stay out of their way. And I think that's part of what the Attorney General in New York is doing, is just giving the NRA time, because as time continues to pass, the NRA is not getting stronger. And then the second part is that the Attorney General's her charge, in terms of the removing LaPierre, removing Frazier, and then restitution from the four, Powell, Phillips, LaPierre, and Frazier. Then it's a question of, what, if any, structural changes would the judge do? Rocky Marshall has put out several posts, forecasting
another former board member,
looking at revenues and forecasting that the association is on trend for bankruptcy, and that the bankruptcy judge would be the best answer. The question is, will the NRA either just as in the course of operations, in terms of their declining revenue and increasing legal costs, cross that bankruptcy threshold, or will the costs that would be incurred by the association post resolution of the New York case or the DC case drive the NRA into bankruptcy? Because the only way to me to reform the board is number one, you have to abolish the executive council, because the executive council is that group of predominantly former presidents who, to me, that is the real board of the NRA. They're the ones who make the decisions.
And how many people are on that right now?
7 or 8.
Because one of the key complaints about the NRA's management is that the board is too big, right? There's 76 board members. A lot of them aren't
a nonprofit.
Heavily involved.
In a nonprofit, you have what is typically called the fundraising board. And that is what the 76 directors are. Their job is to do what they're told and raise money. And then you have but they are all fiduciaries under New York law.
Right.
So they're all liable for the actions of the association. And then you'll have a smaller group that tends to be the decision-making board, and that's the executive committee, of which there are 20 members. But the executive committee only meets in between regular board meetings where there's a decision that has to be made on a timely basis.
Mm-hmm.
And it's to me, that's, they don't meet very frequently at all. But the executive council takes no minutes. They're like the special litigation committee. There are no minutes, so there is no transparency to the board for what deliberations go on. An example would be the first vice president of the NRA, Willis Lee, was removed. He was not put back in place at the board meeting on Monday. Bob Barr was elected first vice president. And part of that came from the resolution to extend Charles Cotton another year came from the Special Litigation Committee. And then that was then endorsed by the Executive Council in its communication to the board. And so that was okay, we're doing this. And then, throughout the board meeting and the committee meetings last week, Willis Lee went from being first vice president to not being an officer.
Right.
And
which is very unusual too.
It's very unusual. And again, that's I'll say a lack of transparency. I think, Willis posted on Facebook that, the nominating committee report was slipped under his door. And so he found out he was out as first vice president by a note that was shared with all board members being slipped under his door.
But that's a common thing too. The whole slipping under the door,
yeah.
The ballot stuff, like that's another thing that's happens commonly at these meetings, right?
Well, that's where there's a small group of people that make a decision and then they communicate the decision to the board and the board is expected to approve it.
Yeah, it's sort of something out of a movie, but that's how it actually operates.
Yeah, and that dissent is not even debate is not. It's rubber stamp, rubber stamp, rubber stamp. So to me, the board does not operate as a board in terms of governing the association. The executive council really governs the association. The board is kept busy. It's busy work that benefits the members and benefits the association. But it keeps them away from any of the true governing of the association.
Interesting. And so, you mentioned this fiduciary responsibility, and this is something that always fascinates me about people who are joining the board now, because obviously there's been all these significant legal issues with the NRA, and it's become fairly clear that your average NRA board member on their own isn't going to have much impact on how decisions are made there. Certainly not if you're against what the rest of the board wants to do, but you're still going to be responsible for those decisions. At the very least, if you do nothing to, make your objections known, which very few people. That's probably been maybe a dozen board members have publicly done something to show dissent through votes or trying to intervene in the bankruptcy or public comments or so forth. And the rest of them, even if they don't necessarily agree, it does seem like there's a lot of specialization on the board where they're really just concerned about whatever committee they happen to be on. You get a lot of like sports shooters, professional shooters will join the NRA board and they're really there just to focus on whatever their sports shooting category is. And it's unclear to me if they understand the fiduciary responsibilities that they have, especially given that the NRA has in the past lost its directors and officers insurance, which, covers you in the situation where you might get sued over a decision that you were part of making. And I'm interested in your personal calculation when you decided to take that position on the board, because other people have declined. Kraut, who you brought up earlier, now works at the Second Amendment Foundation. He declined when his opportunity came. He had previously run for the board, but he declined to go on the board when people were forced off or resigned or what have you. And so I'm interested in why you thought it was like what went into your personal calculus on joining this board, where you're going to have fiduciary responsibility for decisions made and you don't agree with a lot of the decisions that they've been making.
So a couple things. One is prophylactically, I secured individual liability insurance for what I may have been exposed for serving on a nonprofit board. So rule one is always don't become victim number two. So protect myself. When I consulted with my counsel to join the board, his recommendation was don't. But I ran for the board for 3 years. I felt I had an obligation to those who voted to sign petitions to get me on the ballot and voted for me when I was on the ballot, or even wrote me in when I was not. That I had an obligation to follow through on what I said I was running for. So I did that, and in consultation with my counsel, it was okay. Well, look at what you can, but make sure you're protected. So I made visits to headquarters and I read documents. My first visit to headquarters, I read a little over 2.5 feet of paper to go through and check things. So I read the directors and officers policy. I mean, I had to go to headquarters. I could read it in paper. I could have no electronic devices with me to do it. The only thing that I was allowed to have was my handy dandy little notebook here. And I took notes on paper, but I was an accountant back in '74 when we were doing things on handwritten ledgers. So I'm okay writing stuff in handwritten ledgers. But I looked at the DNO policy, and the DNO policy I felt adequately protected me for my service on the board.
Okay.
The other thing is
that has been something of a point of contention as well ever since they lost the previous one. Lloyd's of London dropped it. But there was a lot of uncertainty about exactly what was put in place after that.
I will say, if I had been elected to the 76th director position last year, I would have had a different opinion. But because I was coming on while insurance was in full coverage, there was no change in policy. That for the policy that I was covered under, that I felt that there was coverage for me, but backed up by what I had. Because when you look at the coverage and you divide it by 76 directors, there's not a whole lot of coverage for an individual director. And so I'll say I had almost as much personal DNO coverage as the association has for all 76 directors. So I wanted to protect myself.
Right. And, I remember a former board member who resigned back in 2019 after the big internal fight started. The way he put it to me, was that it's like serving on a symbolic board.
Yeah.
In that you don't have any real power as one of 76, but you carry all of the responsibility of serving on a real board.
It's exactly accurate. And as coming on as an interim, I did not have the benefit of going through board orientation that new board members get. And so this was one, again, reaching out to council. I said, okay, if I'm a new board member in New York Corporation, what should I do? And they referred me to the New York State Attorney General Charities Bureau website, which has a really good guide for board members of not-for-profits in New York. And it outlines what your responsibilities are. And I've been serving on board since the late 90s. And so I was always Pennsylvania companies or organizations. So I looked at that, and so some of it was very, the concepts are similar, language is a little different in terms of what your responsibilities are. But I think that I don't know if other directors were given that. I have heard anecdotally that prior board orientation was the quote was, "They're not ready to have that yet," and I don't know if it was ever given to them. But to me, that you go on the board, you have to stand up and understand what your obligations are.
Right, certainly. And so, just to sort of wrap things up here, what is it that you're hoping to see the NRA do? Like, what if you could, if you're speaking to your fellow board members and you're telling them, your top priorities for how to fix the organization. I believe you sent a letter to the other members. There was some reporting on that from NRA in Danger had a copy of it, or what can you lay out some of the top priorities you had in that letter, or what your general thoughts to the people who still are on the board would be?
I mean, first was, be aware of what your legal obligations are under New York law. Make sure you know that. Second was about transparency and record access. Typical boards provide their board members with the information that they need through an electronic portal that watermarks things so you know who's seen what. But having to incur personal cost. I mean, it was nice for me. I live in Philly. It's a 2-hour drive. So 2-hour drive in an overnight hotel, and I've got millions of points, so my hotels are free. So I could drive down and spend a day reading documents and drive home. So, my cost out of pocket was under $100. It was just gas and tolls. But I had to do that 4 times in terms of getting the documents that I had asked for. Board members shouldn't have to do that. They should be able to look at things. And then on the financial side, trend analysis. You need to look at, as a board, need to look at trends, see what's going on. And to me, the declining membership revenue is extremely troubling. And
that's gone down. Obviously we published an internal budget report a little while back for last year.
Yeah.
That was really bad. And the numbers in the annual report that they give out publicly at the meeting are, back up that what was in the report that we published. Although the one they give out at the meeting covers things up a little bit, or, it's a different picture because it includes the foundation and some of the other nonprofits that the NRA
and I think that's one of the challenges is that those.
But it's continuing to go down, right? Just real quick, since the 2022, revenue is still declining.
It is down month. It's down month over month. It's lower
because their budget was calling for a big increase. Sort of.
Not even an increase. It's less than they've gotten less than they had same time last year, and so that's one of the challenges when I talk about transparency. You have all these sub entities that are separate corporations, but the information presented to the board is presented consolidated, and there's the strength of the assets of the foundation and the other entities like the Civil Rights Defense Fund. That when you roll it all up, it looks great, but when you pull it apart. All the sub-entities are nice and solid, but when you look at the core of the NRA, and that is what the board is the core NRA board.
The membership organization.
So as an example, I was at the foundation committee meeting on, I think it was Wednesday or Thursday, and since I am not on the board of the foundation, I had to leave when they went into executive session. So the foundation is its own board. Why is the board only looking at consolidated information with the foundation stuff lumped in? It should be looking just at the NRA by itself. And to me, that's part of the obfuscation. You can say is, they're playing hide the meatball. Because you cover it up with all this other stuff, you can't see the true status of what the association is. And so I don't think that's what I tried to do with the letter to the board is, I went and looked at this. You need to be aware of it. And, this was a letter to the board. I am upset that it was leaked because it was really meant to go just to the board.
But so I guess in the end here, there haven't been many accomplishments from the sort of reformers, the dissenters on the board, including yourself. There hasn't been a big uprising of NRA members to try and change the makeup of the board. In fact, voting in the board elections is at an all-time low, from what I understand, as far as percentages go.
3% of the eligible voters voted.
Yeah, something like 75,000 votes that were actually counted this year, compared to 4.2 million members, which 4.2 million members is down a million from its peaks. The revenue's way down. What do you see as the future of the organization? I mean, why do you think people haven't bought into the idea of reforming the organ. Why haven't NRA members bought into the idea of trying to reform things? You mentioned a little bit earlier some of the, like, perhaps people have kind of given up on fixing it, or at least a sizable chunk of them. But is that all it is, or do people just not believe you, or what?
No,
what do you think?
I think there is. When you look at how the resolutions voted at the meeting, there are a substantial number of members that support the association with its current leadership, because part of it is from a messaging standpoint. Anything negative about the association or leadership is you're just reading Bloomberg, and so la 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 la. I don't want to hear it. And so I think that's part of where many of the members are. The members who are trying to reform it, you get tired of beating your head against the brick wall because it's not changing. The board is not taking up the responsibility to lead the organization or the association into the future. They're looking in the rearview mirror. And so the nominating committee, the elections process, is not bringing anybody on the board who is interested in reforming. The board has antibodies against anybody who's trying to do anything different. It's like kill it, kill it, kill it. And people get tired of being told they're a Bloomberg tool. They're trying to do the right thing, and it's like, well, if you're not interested in getting it, I will take my energy elsewhere. And that's why you see USCCA and Firearms Policy Coalition and Second Amendment Foundation and GOA, their membership is growing, but they're still combined less than the NRA.
Much less. Yes.
Yeah, I would say we need a strong NRA that is leading the fight. And the challenges as the revenues have declined, the resources have been constrained. And the NRA is capable of doing less and less because it has less people to do. And they're celebrating that, yes, we accomplished this less. We accomplished these things, but it's less than we used to. And without a clear perspective of, your trend and trajectory is down. At some point, it reaches an unsustainable level. So, when you're, I think I can phrase it this way. I'm trying very hard to make sure that I maintain my confidentiality, even as a former board member. But when an organization is cutting costs to keep its budget balanced, that means it's doing less. When you're leaving positions vacant, you're doing less. And an old boss of mine had a phenomenal line: "You cannot shrink yourself to prosperity." And the NRA as an association needs to grow itself into prosperity. And the growth needs to come from membership. That's why I talk about one of the boulders. Growing membership is what is the lifeblood of the association, and that's what makes it a formidable association protecting our rights.
Right. Certainly that is the strength of the NRA, is the membership. I think that's something that is often overlooked in major media commentary about the NRA, but is undeniably true. And you can see the effects of losing membership on the group right now. But last question here, because I've kept you for longer than I said I would. But as we mentioned earlier, the vote count was very low, and the basis there is one other way to get on the board, as you have practiced yourself. It's difficult. It's the vast majority of board members get on there by going through the nominating committee, which is controlled, of course, by the board. But you can get on by petition, and the threshold for getting on the ballot by petition is a percentage of the votes cast, right? And now that there are so few votes being cast, the threshold is fairly low. It's a couple hundred signatures from
378.
So do you plan to run again? And if not, do you see plans to try and reinvigorate this sort of internal reform movement through having a lot of people run under that, this lower bar?
Personally, I am not going to run again. Part of it is I've spent 4 years trying to do it, and I look at where things are, and do not believe that I could affect the change that needs to be affected through the petition process. The petition process would need to put at least 15 new board members beyond what the nominating committee does on the board for 3 consecutive years to have enough people to override the I'll call it the established
leadership.
The established leadership. And even if they do, again, they're only at that outside fundraising board level. They don't get at that 20-person executive committee, because there would be until there's enough votes on the board to get people on the executive committee. Again, you need a majority of the board to do that. So you're going to need 38 board members working for reform to start to even affect the executive committee.
Yeah, I think that math adds up.
Yeah.
And it does seem like a pretty bleak outlook for any internal reformers, anyone who wants to, remove Wayne LaPierre, essentially.
Yeah.
There's just not a lot of...
The other one I'm going to be
that.
Removing Wayne LaPierre is not going to change anything, because it's a systemic issue, and it's the executive council that really controls things. Wayne is executing what he does. So if Wayne is removed by the court and there's no other structural change made, nothing is going to change, because the executive council will put somebody in there who is going to execute what they want.
All right. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to share your thoughts and point of view on your time at the NRA and the state of the organization. As always, we are happy to have any other board member as a different point of view on the show, or Wayne or whoever else to represent the NRA and current leadership. Be more than happy to make time for them as well. Just let me know. But until next time, maybe we'll have you on in the future as well. You can give us some more insight into the next. I'm sure there will be more NRA stories that come down the line here in the short term. The trial's set to start this year in New York, and as you said, Rocky Marshall has predicted the organization could go back into bankruptcy before then, even potentially. I don't know beyond what's been publicly published exactly how the finances are sitting right now, but yeah, certainly we can. I'm sure we'll have more opportunity, more reason to have you on in the future. So I really appreciate you taking the time. And if people want to follow you, I don't know if that's something you're interested in having people do at this point now that you're going back into private life, but where can they do that?
I still have my Substack. It's taitnra.substack.com. So that's out there. I have been silent since I joined the board because I wanted to honor my fiduciary responsibilities. But I think with the publication of this, I will start it back up again, linking to this podcast.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much for joining us. And we're going to head on over to our news update. Okay, I'm back once again with our wonderful contributing writer, Jake Fogelman. How are you doing this week, Jake?
I'm doing pretty good, Steve. How are you this week?
I'm doing well. The Sixers just won their third game. They're on the way to a sweep of the Nets, which is nice. It's sad that Ben Simmons is not actually playing so that we can't, dunk on him.
Yeah.
But it seems that we are well on our way to making the finals and then losing, and then probably Embiid gets snubbed for MVP. That seems to be the trend this year in Philly sports. That's what I expect to happen. Nothing good can ever come to us, but except for that one Super Bowl. We did win the Super Bowl not that long ago. Still pretty happy about that. Sucks that we lost this Super Bowl, but anyway, happy that the Sixers won last night. It's a gutsy win. We're filming on Friday, so we're talking about the Thursday win here. But yeah, Other than that, I'm actually probably going to buy a new gun this weekend. I've been thinking about it for a long time. You run a business, you don't really want to, especially like a new startup business, you never really want to spend any money on anything, to be honest with you. Because I'm just always worried about what comes next. I want to have money in case I need it for the business, but I think it's time to upgrade my concealed carry. Have you seen that Active Self Protection has a new app, by the way?
I have not, but I've heard about this. I have not seen the app, but
yeah. So they put out their own app that has like premium content on it. This is not an ad, by the way, but I do their podcast, right? So people should check out the Active Self Protection podcast if you like the Reloads podcast, because they do interviews with each week with somebody who survived a self-defense shooting or some sort of self-defense situation, and so it's really good stuff. And then at the end we do a news update on that podcast, and I'm on it with Mike Wilver, and it's wonderful. And so I spend a lot of time talking to those guys. I saw them at the NRA annual meeting, and yeah, they're launching a new premium app, and so I downloaded it, and I was watching their video on round count, like how many rounds do you really need to carry? Because Active Self Protection's whole thing is that they analyze actual self-defense shootings and incidents on video, right? Because there's in our modern age, there's a lot of these incidents get caught on video all over the world, right? And so they're always looking at them and going through them and coming up with lesson plans based around what actually happens in these self-defense situations. And so they did and they've got hundreds of these videos over on their YouTube channel for anyone who hasn't heard of them or checked them out. They're a fantastic training resource. But the new app has compilations, as extended compilations of that sort of go over each individual question that often comes up in self-defense situations. And so I watched the one they did on round counts, and they showed the different scenarios. As we've talked about on the show, most people who defend themselves with a gun don't actually have to fire any rounds, right? And they show videos where that happens, and they show videos where 1 or 2 or 3 rounds was enough, and then they show videos where it was 6, and then they show videos where the person only had 6 and ran out, and therefore did not make it or was attacked after the point where they shot several people, because there's a lot of multiple attacker incidents that they're shown in there, which is something you have to be aware of. And then they go all the way through to people who'd shot like 17 rounds and needed all of those rounds to survive. So, it just made me go down the rabbit hole of preparedness, which is a common issue, I think, in the concealed carry world. You could come up with scenarios based on real life events that send you down. I need a backup gun because look at this situation. Someone's gun didn't work. It didn't, something happened where they needed their backup gun or whatever. You can go down those rabbit holes forever. I will say that in Active Self Protection's experience, people very rarely, if ever, actually reload during a self-defense incident, during a shooting. But so that's another thing why you might want to carry a gun with more rounds. Anyway, this brings me to the gun I want to get, which I've wanted to get anyway for a while, which is the 6-hour P365X macro, which is it's sort of a big brother of the P365XL. And it feels like it should be small enough that I could still conceal it reliably. I carry actually a fairly old gun right now. I carry a Springfield XDS, which only holds 8 rounds of 9. And so the X macro holds 17 in the right magazines. So I'll have to figure out a way to buy some 10-round magazines that'll fit into that gun if I'm going to carry it in DC. But I'm still waiting on my permit there. I finished my class, by the way. And I got my Pennsylvania non-resident. I got that permit to update everyone for the last time we talked about this. So I'm back to being good to go in Pennsylvania. And Delaware County did give me a non-resident permit despite, different statements that they've put out in the past saying they won't do them. But so that's good. And so I'll probably get that gun this weekend. I bought a LifePod safe, the Vault-Tec one. You heard of those?
Yeah, are those like the quick access biometric type safes, or is that something else?
No, it's just an electronic safe that you see it a lot with like gun tubers, and Coleon Noir has a version of it, like a customized version, and and then Lena Mikulek, who has the pro shooter, she just put out a line with SIG. Did you see that? The 6 Hour Rose.
I have not seen that. No,
it's just the P365 line, but it's sort of cosmetically done to be more appealing to women. I think it's one of the things I like about that line, actually, and my girlfriend really likes it. So she might actually end up with one. Is that the guns aren't really, they're the best guns that SIG has for concealed carry, frankly, the 365 line. And so they're not really any different. They didn't make, and they're not painted pink or whatever, which is the typical lady gun thing that the industry does. So it's a little more sophisticated, I think, than previous attempts to appeal to women. Not that there's anything wrong with a pink gun or whatever, but this is a little more. It's a different style than that, and it comes with one of these Vault-Tec LifePods as part of the package. So don't tell Coleon or Lena, but I bought just the regular one because it's cheaper. It's like under $100 to get one of those safes. So it seems like a decent deal. It's a nice little travel safe. So I'm looking forward to upgrading my whole concealed carry experience here, I guess, this weekend. What about you?
Yeah.
Did you do anything?
I say similar. I didn't get a new gun, but I actually just got a new optic for my first optic for one of my pistols. I have a Glock 45 MOS, so it came pre-drilled for an optic, and I just didn't get around to putting one on for the longest time. And I finally got a good deal on a Hollow Sun, which is made specifically for the Glock MOS, so you don't need a base plate or anything, and it just sits right in the slide. And I finally took it to the range last weekend and put a few hundred rounds through it, got it sighted in, and I love it. Once I got it dialed in, I was putting 5-round groups, like the size of a $50. It was just really cool. And it's my first foray into this dot world. I know it's kind of been all the rage in the pistol community the last couple of years, and it's been pretty cool.
I haven't gotten into it yet. That's actually something I want to do too. And I might buy the macro that has the integrated red dot. I think it's about $1,000 at the store near me, which is not, I think that's about what you might expect buying them separately. So pre-installed from the factory, getting that would be pretty nice. Well, I'll have to see which one I actually go with. I'll probably go to all of the gun stores first to make sure that I get the best deal. But yeah, no, I might do that. I might switch to red dot as well. Well, we'll see. Obviously makes it a little bit more bulkier to carry, but
right. Yeah. See, this isn't my carry gun. I just use this as a range. Maybe, there's nothing that says I won't carry this at some point, but at least for now, it was just to see how I like shooting it and if I can find the dot and all that sort of stuff. Right.
Yeah. I mean, I really should put a dot on my 320X5, which, by the way, I used for IDPA a couple of weeks back. I have to have there was a member who, Cody Claxton is a Reload member, and he invited me to do some IDPA just to, get out and do some competitive shooting, experience it. It was a lot of fun. And I used my 320X5, which performed great. And I thought I should probably put a red dot on this. Now it's the old cut, I guess. It's one of the growing pains things for the industry. I think the last 5 years or so is a lot of these companies that started offering cuts into the gun from the factory started doing it with their own proprietary cuts. So you could only fit their gun, or you had to get the plate, or it's a terrible thing. But I think it's become more standardized now. If I'm not totally up on red dot tech, so please don't flame me, but in the comments. But yeah, I think it's become a little bit simpler now for people to just, you get this gun, the cut's pretty standard. You can put a bunch of different aftermarket, hollow sun or whatever else if you want, or you can use a SIG, or you could use Vortex or whoever, and it's not as stupidly complicated anymore. But yeah, so I had initially been pretty skeptical about buying, like, why are these things so expensive for basically a laser that points at a piece of glass? But I was educated on that pretty quick when I bought a cheap one, and it didn't fit. And obviously, there's certainly some legitimacy to charging more for these, because they have to survive the recoil impulse of your gun firing all the time, or being dropped, or being knocked around, or whatever. So it did start to make more sense to me after I tried them out myself. So, but yeah, I think I might go with a red dot either. Maybe I'll try it out on the 320 first, and then move to the to my carry gun. But I don't know. We'll see. We'll see how it goes. Keep us updated on how yours is performing. I mean, it sounds like it's going great.
Yeah, we'll do. I'm definitely excited for now.
Yeah. Well, all right. Well, let's get into the news of the week. I think we're going to try something a little bit new, a little different this time. We're going to go through some of the headlines that we put into our weekly newsletter. Jake, you got some of those for us. What are we hearing this week outside?
Sure. So outside of the reload, we have the Michigan state legislature just officially passed a red flag bill, and they sent it to Governor Gretchen Whitmer's desk. That comes out of the Detroit Free Press. We have Washington State passing their assault weapon ban, which makes them the 10th state to have an assault weapon ban. That's also awaiting signature from their governor.
Yeah, that's a pretty significant one, right? You're seeing sort of some of the momentum, and I think we'll talk a little bit more about this in our main news segment of this week. But Washington pushing forward on their assault weapons ban. That's the third state since last year to do it, and really there was a 20-year gap between the first round of assault weapons bans and these new ones. So that's an interesting trend. But
it's definitely a big deal. Then we have a federal court ruling out of D.C. where a judge denied a request for an injunction against the district's large capacity magazine ban after the judge said that they were not protected by the Second Amendment. That comes from Bearing Arms.
Yeah, that's another one. We've seen that happen before as well. With I forget where it was, but there was another, basically the same exact logic, which is essentially that. Although this one, I think, threw in the idea that the magazine capacity limits are necessary to make sure that police have better firepower than civilians, which that's saying the quiet part out loud sort of thing. Right. I feel like.
Yeah. So the state needs to be able to shoot you better. It's essentially that logic.
Yeah. Okay. Boy, I don't know that that's going to stand up on appeal, but okay.
Right. And then lastly, we have a federal appeals court denying a injunction request for Illinois' assault weapon ban. So this is just one of the many lawsuits against Illinois' state assault weapon ban. But this one was an appeal of a previous denial up to the Seventh Circuit, and the Seventh Circuit also denied a request to stay that ban while the litigation goes on.
Can you say that again? Would they?
A district court ruling previously denied an injunction request against that. The plaintiffs appealed that up to the Seventh Circuit, and now the Seventh Circuit has also denied a request to stay that ban. And that comes from a local Fox station. Right.
So the federal side of the suits against the Illinois assault weapons ban have not gone as well as the state side.
That's right.
Because the state side's been successful to this point. It's actually similar to what's happening in Oregon, right, with their new permit to purchase and magazine limits, where the federal judge was willing to was not willing to block those, but the state judge was. And so we've seen the same thing now in Illinois. Of course, this is another one that's ripe for potential quick action up to the Supreme Court. Now, quick is a relative term when you're talking about the federal courts, but we could see some action on the Illinois case, maybe even before the California or Maryland cases, because those are still tied up in lower court deliberations. But we will see on that front. And then I think Colorado failed to pass their assault weapons ban this week.
I was going to say this last story will kind of lead us into our main news segment of the week. But Colorado, as you said, the assault weapon ban bill that was introduced was officially rejected, even after lawmakers offered to water it down a bit. And that comes to us from the Colorado Sun. But that's definitely a big step because Colorado is a triple blue state and they've made gun control a really big priority this session. And yet in the very first committee hearing, this assault weapon ban bill was given the axe.
Yeah. And you wrote a whole members piece on this about what it potentially means for this sort of resurgence of assault weapons bans. We talked about this a little bit in the past, where I think I had a piece initially like last year saying that assault weapons bans, the era of them is over, and that was based on the polling has been going in the opposite direction. It's been trending against assault weapons bans in the vast majority of polls out there. I think the YouGov poll is sort of the one big outlier where they're still finding like 60% plus support. But basically every other major pollster has found a decrease in support to the point where now the latest polling, which is still, they don't do these polls every week or whatever, like you see with approval pollings, but it's actually turned against assault weapons bans on the national scale, at least. And then obviously the Supreme Court's ruling in Bruin casts a lot of doubt on the constitutionality of these laws because they're modern laws that don't seem to have historical analogs dating back to the founding era. Obviously the courts, that's what's the fight in the courts is going to be about. So we'll see where the federal judges come down on this ultimately, and if the Supreme Court steps in, but it turned out that wasn't quite right. We've seen now a resurgence in at least deeper blue states. As we just mentioned there, Washington follows Illinois, which followed Delaware in adopting state level bans. And obviously the House last year passed its own version of an assault weapons ban on the national level. Now that didn't go anywhere after the House passed it, and it's not likely to come back up again in this Congress, but you have seen a bit of movement in this way, a bit of momentum for gun control advocates who want to ban AR-15s and AK-47s and other guns that are affected by these laws. As we've mentioned before, an assault weapon ban is a fairly nebulous term. It means different things depending on what state you're in and what their definition of assault weapon is. Usually it's semi-automatic firearm that accepts a detachable magazine, is center fire, and has one or two of a list of banned features like telescoping stocks or barrel shrouds or pistol grips, things of that nature. And again, each state seems to have a different definition of what an assault weapon is, just like most states have a different definition of what a large capacity magazine is. Some it's 10 rounds, some it's 15, some it's 17, some it's different for rifles than it is for handguns. You get the idea. But it seems now with this Colorado defeat that these proposals are bumping up against political reality, right? That's what you wrote this week.
Yeah, it's sort of a Rorschach test, right? Because you could look at the momentum of Delaware, Illinois, Washington, and say, wow, maybe this is a sustained resurgence. But over the same period, you've seen triple blue states now pretty quickly reject assault weapon bans. So not only Colorado this week, but New Mexico earlier during this legislative session also pretty quickly killed an assault weapon ban, and they're a triple blue state. You have new Democratic trifectas in Minnesota and Michigan this year that have also made gun control a really big political priority, and an assault weapon ban has not been a part of that list. So you're seeing the very real politics of a hardware ban butt up against this new renewed momentum, at least among the gun control activist class, to try to pass these. And as you said, those same overarching that underlying features of the Bruin decision and public opinion are also still present. So when you're hitting up against the sort of the extent of your political runway, and then you have impending judicial rulings coming down the line, it's sort of like a closing window for this resurgence, if it even is a resurgence.
Right. That's the big difference, right, between Sullivan's bans and the sort of streak that they've been on, and permitless carry, right, which also saw Nebraska come through and adopt that policy this week, making it the 27th state to do so. But you still have a couple, the permitless carries playing field is really shrinking. The possible states that are going to be relatively easy pickups are now already picked up. So you still have the Carolinas, you've got Louisiana maybe. You have states where they've passed these laws or they're controlled by Republicans, where you could see this still happening, but that's not a lot of states left that are likely to go that direction. The big difference, though, as you just alluded to there, is permitless carry activists can just keep chipping away at this. They can keep chipping away at opposition to the law. They can keep trying to vote out people who won't support it, so on and so forth. In Louisiana, for instance, they could, if they change the governor to somebody who supports permitless carry, basically they'll win. And so they could just wait till the next election to do that, or they can elect more supporters in the legislature to the point where they can override a veto, reliably, and get it through that way. And so they have time, and they can continue to move on this. Whereas with the Sullivan's bans, it seems fairly clear that they're not going to be constitutional for much longer. We're still waiting on rulings in California and Maryland, but I think you talked about what there were some warning signs. I mean, obviously you've got the Supreme Court. One of the first things they did after Bruin was grant, vacate, and remand a number of cases. One of them was the Maryland assault weapons ban case that the Fourth Circuit had previously said that the ban was constitutional, and the Supreme Court is now saying, go back and look at this again under our new standard, which, look, it doesn't mean that it's guaranteed that they're not explicitly saying this is wrong and these laws are unconstitutional, but it's the closest thing you're going to get to that, I would say. But there's another reason, right, to think that the court is going to go in the direction of declaring these unconstitutional.
Yeah, if you look at
in your piece.
Yeah. So one of the sitting members of the current Supreme Court, Justice Brett Kavanaugh, was at one point a D.C. Circuit Appeals Court judge, and he has a pretty famous dissenting opinion on the district's own assault weapons ban that got before his court. Now, it was a dissent, but he wrote a pretty lengthy dissent analyzing that ban under what he called the text, history, and tradition standard, which is virtually identical to the new standard that's been articulated by Bruin. Which is essentially what all these other courts now have to use to evaluate whatever assault weapons ban, whether it's Maryland's or there's a case out of California and there's a smattering of other cases around the country. And so if he's already spelled out sort of the test using history and tradition where this ban would be unconstitutional, that's kind of a pretty big indicator that, at least according to the high court, that's how they think this ought to end up.
Yeah. So the assault weapons ban advocates are butting up against the political reality of how difficult it is to pass new gun bans in America, even in very blue states. But they're also running out of time likely to do it because the courts seem primed to step in and say these restrictions are not constitutional. So that's the big difference between them and permitless carry activists, because it's not the same sort of court ruling is not going to come to permitless carry. They're not going to rule that unconstitutional.
Right.
And so, that's the big dichotomy, I think. And that's people should read your piece if they want to get an even deeper look at that and understand the issue a little bit better. But that's all we got time for this week. I know we actually went pretty long because the main interview was very long, but I think we covered a lot of important things. And hopefully you guys will come back again next week. If you like what we do here at The Reload, please share this podcast rate it on whatever podcasting app you're listening to it on. Give it a thumbs up on YouTube, and review it for us. It helps spread the word. And if you want more reporting from us, you can head over to thereload.com. You can sign up for our free weekly newsletter, or if you want to support the work we're doing, you can buy a membership. That is how we fund our journalism, our writing, and that is the best way to directly help us. This is actually our 2-year anniversary. April 19th was when we launched 2021. So we're going strong, but we absolutely hope to continue to grow and bring more reporting to more people. And so we can do that with your help. And you'll also, of course, get exclusive access to hundreds of pieces of analysis and reporting that you can't find literally anywhere else. So head on over to thereload.com today and check out our membership options if you want to help us out. But until next time, that's all we've got for you.